Good afternoon. I'm Melanie White, president of the Women's Club. Wow, it feels so good to be back together again, doesn't it? Oh, yes. It's wonderful to be here. Welcome to members in the auditorium, as well as our members that are viewing online. It's just great to be back together after all of this winter weather that kept us shut in. Following today's program, please join us in the Halsey Hall to meet our speaker, Ken Farmer. Now, please, let's silence your cell phones. Take a moment to look in your purse and double check. It really is off. There are so many wonderful opportunities coming up to connect with the Women's Club. We have a tour of Richmond's Roman Catholic Cathedral of the Sacred Heart on February 26 at 10 a.m. Please note, this is rescheduled from the original date of February 18th. There are only a few slots left, so if you want to join in, please do it soon. Sign up for a day trip to the Anne Spencer House in Garden Museum and Poplar Forest, scheduled on April 2nd. The registration deadline is March 2nd. Our annual business meeting and luncheon is on April 13th, and the registration deadline is April 2nd. You can sign up for these special events on the Programs tab in your members portal at thewomensclubrichmond.org, or you may visit the Women's Club table at the reception for assistance in registering for any of our upcoming special events. Please plan to attend our Monday program on February 23rd when we hold our elections for the slated officers and nominating committee. I hope that you've had a chance to review how wonderful our new officer slate is on our Friday email and on the Women's Club website. And now I have the pleasure to welcome new members. Amy Williams, Dr. Carol Beers, Deborah Sonetto, Denise Leonard, Ellen Davis, Lauren Willis, Madison Allen, Margaret Somner, Judy Clark, and Patricia Avery are new members. A very special thank you to our, welcome. A very special thank you to the new member endorsers, Katie Gooch, Dr. Madeline Goldman, Catherine Weisiger, Karen Burson, M. Haxel Ward, Deborah Hinton, Betty Walker, Jamie Upton, and Lee Coleman Thomas. Thank you so very much for the proposers. If you're a new member, I encourage you to just come to everything, sign up for the special events. That's how you get to meet people in small groups, and it's how you get to get a real close personal connection and start some of those what I know will be lifetime friendships here at the Women's Club. We welcome you. Thank you to the program committee for providing our refreshments today, and thank you to Susan Rockwell for serving as chair of the day. Susan will now introduce Ken Farmer.
Good afternoon. My name, speaking of new members, my name is Sue Rockwell, and I am a pretty new member. And this year, I'm on the program committee, so if there are new members out there, I can tell you getting involved is really wonderful. The program committee that I've been spending time on is such an esteemed and hard-working group, and you'd be surprised how much work goes into getting these wonderful speakers like Ken Farmer. I'm so excited to be here to introduce Ken today. While Ken is a recognized expert in various fields, including fine art, furniture, and decorative arts, he's also known amongst his peers as an urban legend. And I'm going to add that after having lunch with him, he is truly a Renaissance man. He is a regular appraiser on Antiques Roadshow and has been since its inception in 1996. Ken came to his field first as a performer, musician, and singer of tradition, Appalachian, and American roots music. And in his words, he fell in love with Appalachian history. In the early 1970s, along with his wife, Jane, both shared a passion and became avid students and collectors of Americana and Southern material culture. In particular, songs, history, objects, and stories of Southwest Virginia. As an advisor, appraiser, and auctioneer, Ken ran 2 regional auction houses from 1990 to 2015, handling all categories of fine and decorative art. Ken has had several memorable appraisals on the Antiques Roadshow, which I'm sure we're going to hear about today. The expertise that Ken brings to the roadshow, along with his humorous interactions with participants and charming anecdotes and insights, which I know we'll hear today, and we already have at lunch, have made him a favorite, which has contributed to the enduring popularity of the show. Ken is dedicated to educating viewers about the history and significance of antiques, and today we are all looking forward to Ken regaling us with this exciting world and stories of his fascinating journey. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Ken Farmer.
Wow.
That's a lot.
Thank you very much. Can I get a copy of that? Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I have many good memories in Richmond. And Patty Lockridge and I were talking about old times and how we've been in this business and watched it, interest in Southern decorative arts and Americana grow so exponentially in our part of the country, especially since the mid-'70s. And I was very fortunate that early on, I had a taste for shiny things. I love shiny stuff. When I was little, my mother said she'd take me to Rose's in downtown Pulaski, and I would climb the gondolas. She said I could get any toy I wanted. The only trouble was the Lone Ranger cat pistols were hanging at the top of the gondolas. So there I am, 4 or 5 years old, trying to climb the gondolas. They had all the cheap stuff on the low shelves. And I think I frustrated my mother a lot. She basically said my whole life that I had champagne taste on a beer budget. And by the way, my dad did drink PBR. And as bad as that tasted, I still can't believe that young people like it, but, you know, no accounting for that. So, as a stuff person, I kind of get this thing in the right place. We talked about this a lot at lunch. You know, I think it's a blessing and a curse to be a stuff nerd and to care whether or not your surroundings are really interesting or great versus just average or boring. And that has been the quest for me ever since I guess I was little and just didn't know it. But what really got me into it was when I went away to college to Emory and Henry. And I had a professor there, Steve Fisher, that taught the political science of Appalachia. But I also met a guy who was a fabulous singer and guitar player, and he introduced me to a guy named Doc Watson. And from that point on, I wanted to play the guitar and sing like Doc Watson. And it became an avocation of sorts. Played bluegrass full-time for about 3 years in my 20s until my wife got pregnant with our first child, and then I realized that I might want to seek other career opportunities. But my whole thing with the antique thing was sort of that back entrance into the cultural part of it. And then we went to the Charlotte Flea Market in 1974 or 75, which happened once a month in Charlotte, and all these dealers would come down there and bring their wares. And that was where I learned even more about shiny things. And back then, you know, I could go to a yard sale or a country auction and buy a Stanley Level for $2 and shine the brass up on it and take it to Charlotte and sell it for $25. So within a year of being married, we went down there and made $2,000 in one weekend, and 2 weeks later, I quit my state job. And really haven't looked back. You know, we all have these memories and love of the things that have come down through our families. And we're in a time now where there has been sort of a reckoning between the end of the financial crisis as such, 08, 09. That was sort of the bellwether curve moment when we all said, oh yeah, well, you know, things are not, you know, as valuable as they used to be. But, you know, the good news is that there are still some things out there that have held their value very well. And it cuts across all of the categories. So for us, going from being dealers to winding up in the auction business was kind of a logical process, because that whole time when I was in that, I was doing, I was being a dealer pretty much, but, you know, also learning about the cultural part of this and what all goes into the production of our material culture, and what is the value of things now compared to what they would have been. And I think the thing I learned the most from was when I started out in the auction business. I had my first auction out of the back of a pickup truck. And there I am on a porch somewhere in Southwest Virginia selling a house full. That's me without the Stetson. And I remember having the podium. I had a speaker that sat down in the front of that ran off of 8D batteries. And let me tell you something, that thing was loud. But we went from having sales in people's yards to, you know, having tents. I bought about, I don't know, 8,000 or 10,000 square foot of tents. Of course, that's a piece of work to put those up and be ready to do it. But that's really how I got started in this, and it was a learning process from the get-go. And those of you who have been doing this long enough know what it was like before we had group malls, before we had eBay and online presence in general. It was just a matter of whether you put an ad in the newspaper or you mailed a brochure to people. And we have come so far from that, it's unbelievable. One of the first things that I ever sold at auction that I got really excited about, and one of the first things I ever got on Antiques Roadshow, was a paint decorated blanket chest from the Valley of Virginia. This is Starwalt, and it's about that big and about that tall. And I say, that's a $500 blanket chest with about $140,000 worth of paint on it. And there was an article published in the magazine Antiques about this particular school. And this family story on this was interesting because these two sisters were allowed to pick whatever they wanted out of their aunt's house over in the valley. And one sister picked this, and the other one picked the depression glass. And I didn't ask whether or not she split the proceeds with her. But that's the kind of stuff that's got me really excited about doing this and finding something in a state of preservation like that. And that's true for what we do as far as roadshow and everything. We're always looking for something that has an interesting talking point. You know, they usually like to, especially 30 years ago, they didn't want the owners to know everything. But now with the internet and information exchange the way it is, it's pretty much impossible to avoid that. So Antiques Roadshow emails and calls me up about 30 years ago, and they said, we want you to come to Durham, North Carolina, and we want you to do free appraisals all day at your expense. And I said, what you been smoking? There was actually, the guy that sort of got me on there was a part of a company that's now become invaluable, which back then was called Artifact, and they would put out CD-ROMs every quarter with like 200,000 or 300,000 auction sales that had occurred in a time period. So you had stuff from Sotheby's and Christie's. Imagine, you're in Radford, Virginia, and you put that in your computer, and all of a sudden you can see 300,000 items that have sold at auction in the last little while. And back then, all you could do was hope you knew something about it, or maybe you knew somebody that did know about it. And you had books and auction catalogs in a library. Of course, you had to remember what was in them and where they were. So that was a little tough. So anyway, they talked me into going over there and doing it, and I decided that it was pretty cool. Chubb was the sponsor of the show that first year, and I'll never forget at the wrap party, which they call that at the end of the season, I never seen so much top shelf liquor, and it's the biggest shrimp I ever saw in my life. And I said, "Oh man, I think I'll keep doing this." So one thing led to another, and I think one of the reasons they wanted me to do it was because I know a lot about a lot of different things. If you run an auction house in Southwest Virginia or 3 years in Charlottesville like I did, you're going to see a lot of stuff. You're going to kiss a lot of frogs, and you're going to kiss a lot of beautiful people as well. And so when I first started doing it, I was the one that looked at the Stanley tools or the fishing rods, or they think or the guitars, they think because I play the guitar, I know everything there is to know about guitars. And I thought, maybe I better get some books. But eventually we've evolved to the point now where it's very specialized, and the people that work the tables know their stuff. Everybody that does musical instruments, there's one person there that'll do stringed instruments other than violins, and maybe the violin person will know about woodwinds, and so there's a huge store of knowledge at each one of those tables. There's 20-some interest groups. We've done Richmond a couple of times. Did any of you guys get to come to the one in Richmond? So you know what it's like. You stand in line and wait, and then you stand in line and wait. And then you stand in line and wait. When we were doing the civic centers like we did in Richmond, we could have 5,000 or 6,000 people, each with 2 objects, okay? So that's 10,000 to 12,000 objects. You've got about 100 back then, probably more like 70 or 80 appraisers now at all those different tables. So on an average day of doing roadshow, I'll sit at a table and I'll look at 100 or 150 or sometimes 200 items. And it's luck of the draw, hoping that something will come through that resonates with me that I think would be fun to talk about. And then I pray that you haven't Googled it to death. Or now we have Google Image. Any of you guys use Google Image? Now there's a circuitous path to knowledge. And it actually works sometimes, and other times, you got to watch out for what its appearances can be deceiving. The biggest asset for me doing roadshow, whenever I do a TV spot, I always talk to the other appraisers. And they will ask you before or after you film your spot, if you filmed one, you have to put on the form who you talked with to come up with the value and whatever it is, the nature of the object that you're talking about. And it's become almost like I've become friends with people that it's almost like going to school together, or, it's like taking finals and suffering together. There's Lee Keno and myself, lower right. I think that was last year. And there's a bunch of guys that I worked furniture and folk art with year before last. That little tall chest right there was in the Midwest a few years back. I loved that thing because it was particularly made for a member of the family, and it had the little girl's name on it, when she was born and when this was made for her. It was so sweet. Now, in Savannah last year, I did a pickle bottle. And you talk about making something out of nothing. But this, you had to meet the guy that had it. That is aired like in the last 2 weeks. And I was listening to the guy talk and watching him, and he was just so Georgia Southern, just talked so great. And when we talked about it, he talked about the fact that one of the sisters married one of the Yankee soldiers, and I asked him how that went, but he didn't go into any detail. But what was a $300 or $400 Victorian era pickle bottle, to me became a really neat historical thing, because their family had a country store and they used to sell the Yankee soldiers pickles out of it. And there was a note in it, and there was no reason to doubt it. So what was a $300 or $400 pickle bottle became a $1,000 pickle bottle. And for me that was more about the story than the value. And as we go through your all stuff today, and as we talk about all the different things involved with what I do every day, we're going to be looking at balancing emotion with appeal to the market. And the only one thing for sure I've found is nobody will pay us a nickel for how much we love something. When it comes to the green dollars, the greenbacks going on the kitchen table, that's a whole different ballgame. And I will say this, and I'm reiterating a little bit from lunch, but I would say this. If you have not raised your children to be good, guilty Southern children, chances are they ain't going to want most of your stuff. But it's up to us to raise them with a sense of the past is important, and history is important, as well as material objects. And it's so funny as my wife and I evolve along, now that we've been married 52 years. We recently went through redoing a room in our house, and I just couldn't believe how much work it was to get everything out of that room to even do anything to it. And then second of all, we had to revisit everything we had in storage in the basement. And finally, after agonizing over it and working on it 2 or 3 days, I looked at my wife and I said, I think we're just going to let the boys do this after we're gone. Enough's enough. Now this is my favorite thing I've ever appraised on Roadshow. That's a piece of stoneware pottery from Alabama. It's about that tall. It's a great big one. And at the time when we did the appraisal, I was working deck arts, and I think the guy next to me there, that's Carl Krosman, he was working folk art, and he brought it over to me because ostensibly I knew about Southern things. And come to find out, there were initials on the buttons, the lapel buttons of this stoneware face jug, and it said JL. And this is back, about 20 or so years ago. We had no way to know who JL was, but I knew it was a great piece of figural pottery, and I knew that kind of glaze you saw more in South Carolina and Alabama. It's called an alkaline glaze, and when they put it in the kiln, they would throw a lot of salt in there, and it would crystallize, and that would form a lot of the drips on there. In the old days, somebody would call that a tobacco spit glaze, but I don't think the people at the museums use that term anymore. So me and Carl did this together. And you got to picture Carl. You can see him there. You know, he's old money New England. He's got his Ralph Lauren purple label suit on. And this woman that owned this was from Alabama, and her name was Kathy. And so I let Carl take the lead on this because I knew what was coming. And so Carl says, well, Kathy, tell us, where have you had this in your home? And she said, well, that's all Alabama girl. She said, I've had it in the closet the last 2 months so the cat wouldn't pee on it. I admit, I set Carl up. And I have never seen a look on somebody's face. Unfortunately, I don't think that made it to camera. To me, that would have made it the best spot of the year. Long story short, though, I think we said at the time it was worth $30,000 to $40,000, and she sent it to me to sell, and I had a sale in Radford. But at that time, Sotheby's was sort of minorly franchising other people to sell stuff on their website. And I sold it on Sotheby's.com as well as at my auction live, and it brought like $82,000. And since then, another one showed up maybe 10 years ago, sold privately to, I think, the Birmingham Museum for $125,000. And I guess if you had to pick a category that's going up in value, it's great figural or rare and early decorated American stoneware and redware. Not brown and tan crocks that held moonshine in 1890 or 1900, but great early stuff that's rare. As a matter of fact, we're going to talk a little bit about a couple of museums that have a lot of that when we get to one of our objects. So as you go through your house, and the way I look at things is I look at everything in layers. I look at it from the top down, and here's the thing about it. I always say to everybody, first of all, you got to decide what you want to keep if you're thinking about doing anything like downsizing. And then you look at the items and what their values are, and then you have to measure the effort and the expense that it would take to convert any of those objects into money. And, you know, your biggest cost is labor. And the most expense you run into is what you do with everything except the stuff that a good auction house or, you know, a good estate person can sell for you. But when I go in houses, we do a lot of appraisals for charitable donation. We do a lot of things for taxable estates, and sometimes they want us to help them sell things. And what I basically do is coordinate the sale of the things. I don't sell too much myself. And I'm a firm believer in using online engines for bidding. I think these days, if you don't put something online, nobody's going to see it, and I don't know how you're going to get decent money out of it unless it's some one-of-a-kind thing that you got somebody standing there ready to pay whatever you ask for it. But even then, you don't know if you're getting top dollar. And so these are kind of generic pictures that don't really put you in the mood for much of anything. And as I was going through this presentation earlier in your green room back there, thinking I need to get something better in there. But I just tell everybody, you know, the biggest challenge is going to be, what do you want to keep? What do you got room for? And objects have value relative to the nature of the objects. They also have value in terms of how much real estate they take up. Like, how big is it? Is it an 8-foot sideboard with, griffins carved in it that's got a top on it that goes 9 feet tall. Might be a tough sale. Just depends on what it is. Everything's different. And, it's very dynamic and changing. And I didn't ask her, but, I know Patty Lockridge used to do a lot of tag sales and estate sales around here, and she worked for a national company, really. And it's a challenge and an ongoing process. But, I think how you interact with that process depends on how much you want to do personally versus having somebody help you do it. And how much time do you have? How much energy and time do you have? Do you have relatives close by that can help with it? And I'll end this part of the talk with talking about Hayes Plantation down in Edenton, North Carolina. We were called there 3 years ago to do an estate appraisal, and the owner apologized for bringing me down there because she had already made a deal with the foundation that was buying the property. It's been bought by a foundation and now is run and owned by the state of North Carolina. So if you ever go to Edenton, hopefully they'll be doing tours there. That is Hayes Plantation, one of the most perfectly preserved federal era plantation homes in the South. It still has the original window balances in it. And it's really nice inside. And so we went there and we started out in the storerooms looking at things like that Johnson family chair and, books and maps and brown stoneware jars. And we get inside to the living room, and there's some file folders sitting on the table in the living room. And lo and behold, there is a copy of the Constitution, and it's got an ink signature lower right on the back side. All this is 2 sheets about the size of a legal size piece of paper folded over. And that was the document that Congress authorized to be printed and sent to the states for ratification. Because if you read about the Constitution, you read that there's a lot of iterations of it. And, the first one, or the Declaration of Independence, same thing, first one published at this place or whatever. And so the thing that made this singular was the fact that it had the initials and name of Charles Thompson, who was the secretary of the convention for the Congressional Convention, Friday, September 28th, 1787. So when I looked at that, all of my filtration processes start. My first tendency when I see something like that cold just out in general is that it's a fake. But because of being in that house and that being the home of the governor of North Carolina in 1787, I'm thinking, well, there's possibilities. I knew it was period paper. I knew that was an original signature, an ink signature. And beyond that, I had no idea about the rarity of it. And when we got back home and started doing the research, that's when we figured out that Congress authorized 100 copies. Less than 40 of them have that signature on them. And there's only 7 others known to exist. So then it becomes a matter of how do you value something like that? And my first thought was, well, I don't even know if the state of North Carolina will let you sell it because it was supposedly issued to the states. And luckily for the family, the state archives in North Carolina had another one very similar to this. And I think we appraised it at the time for $1 million because there was the cloud on the title. I felt like it didn't have a clear title. But as it turns out, that and a copy of the Articles of Confederation brought about $12.5 million. And I referred it to Brunk Auctions in Asheville. And I know Andrew Brunk really well. I've done roadshow with him for 30 years, but I knew his dad. And I knew that he would do the due diligence and he would not be blinded by the lights. And he did a great job, and the family's attorney did a great job. The day they were supposed to sell this was the day Helene hit. But on the day of Helene, they also got a copy at the auction house signed by all the former attorney generals of the state of North Carolina, asking them not to sell it, or that they couldn't sell it. And of course, a couple of days later, they realized that they could, because the state archives had made this side deal that if the family would give them the extra copy of the Articles of Confederation, then they would let them retain ownership on these items and sell them. So long story short, it was sold, and the guy that bought it wasn't even known to all the people in the trade. None of the people that regularly knew about it were even involved in the bidding. But if you got any papers like that at your house, might want to take a second look. So, you know, it just goes to show you that sometimes the most unassuming things can be the most valuable. And I learned a lot from that. But I think also, you know, 50-some years of messing with this stuff and being a stuff nerd kind of put me in the perfect position. And the other thing I did was I corresponded with a roadshow colleague who lives in Colorado that knows about that stuff, and he was the one that really sort of helped us. And that's the thing about this. There's a whole network of experts out there that really know their stuff. You just have to know which one to ask. And I did that with some of the stuff that we're going to appraise today. How are we doing on time, ladies? Huh? 20 till? Oh, holy moly. All right. How long do I have? 25 minutes. Okay. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, this was the first thing I wanted to talk about. And Pat Hackler, we've talked a little bit about this. Well, where'd that go? Did I punch the wrong thing? Oh, there it is. That is a table that was made in Winston-Salem according to the papers in Mesda in North Carolina, made 1774 to 1796 by Johannes Krauss. And what is Mesda, might you ask? Mesda is the Museum of Early Southern Decorative Arts in Winston-Salem. And we talked a little bit about that at lunch, but basically Frank Horton and his mother, who were, I don't know if they were Wachovia or textile heirs or whatever, but they started buying early North Carolina stuff in the Depression. And in 1951, Williamsburg had a forum in Richmond, and a curator from a New England or a northern museum came down here and got on the podium and pronounced that nothing of merit was made south of the Mason-Dixon line early, except for Williamsburg and Charleston. Well, I think Frank took that as his clarion call. And back in the 70s and other times too, they did a decorative arts survey, and there's the date right there, 11/11/76. And you can't tell so much from that picture, but that's got Queen Anne feet on it. It's a really nice, simple country table made of walnut, poplar secondary. According to the notes, the feet have been replaced. And that would be one of those things that probably would have been worth more 25 years ago than it is now, for the simple reason that it has, originality or condition issues, and it's been refinished, but I still think an insurance value on it would probably be, $5,000 to $7,000. But let's turn that around. If that were totally in the black, untouched, in an old finish, it could be 30 or 40,000. But that's the difference in the market now compared to, say, 25 to 35 years ago. But it's still a great thing. And I wish I had something in my house that was documented at Mazda. About the only thing I got is a couple of Long Ranger capped pistols from Rose's. I don't think Williamsburg or Mazda is going to put that in their files. All right, and here we have a nice painting, Maria Curran. Is Maria here? Your painting's here. If you're not here, I'll just take it home. And this is a really nice painting. It's by a known artist, Hermione Henriette Gooden. She lived 1825 to 1876. Her father was a painter, and she's known for hazy skies, diffuse light, and pictures of ships like this. And the site size of it is 15 to 18 inches, and I saw several similar to this selling at auction for $3,000 to $5,000, and you would probably insure it for a little bit more than that, You ever had it appraised? Okay, good. Here's the thing about it. When you all hear us talk about values, auction estimate, or when I do an estate appraisal, fair market value is what could you actually sell something for. Insurance value is what would you have to pay for it if you bought it from a dealer retail. And you go to whoever the best dealer is for that particular thing like that. All right, our next item could be a lot of fun. That is a physician's cabinet, pre-1900. And if you stop and think about it, Jenny, now, did I read that your relative that owned this was, in Richmond in the 1860s? Where were they located?
He got wounded in 1864 in Pike County, Alabama.
He got wounded in Pike County, Alabama,
He lived in
1864.
about 200 miles away in McDonough, Georgia, which is
Okay, so he was a doctor after the war or during the war? After the war. Well, things like this, the value of something like this can depend as much on who owned it as what it actually is. But the thing that I love about it is it tells the story of what practicing medicine was like between the Civil War and 1900. A doctor, was he in a rural area?
he lived in McDonough, Georgia, which is about 30 miles south of Atlanta.
About 30 miles south of Atlanta. So he probably had, like a general practitioner, rural practice. And so that's his pharmacy. And he would have had things in there to put people to sleep. He would have had things in there for pain relief. He might have had some peppermint if somebody had an upset stomach. There's some morphine in there. I told you we could have some fun with that. It's probably a little crusty now. And, if you ever went to sell it, you couldn't sell, something with morphine in it. But there are collectors. There are collectors out there. But I would say absent illicit materials, I see things like that out there in the market, and they'll bring a few $1,000s, depending on who they belong to and what they were used for. But that's a cool thing to have. Where do you have that in your house? in your living room. So do you keep like little shots of liquor in there or anything? I think you should have like a Halloween party. And, well, never mind. That's a cool thing, though. And you can see there's the scales where he measured it and all the keys to probably the other stuff he had. He would have had a surgical kit and other things. All right. The Bellarmine jug. All righty. Hillary Long. Hillary Long, come on down. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry about that, Hillary. I had a Bob Barker moment there, you know. So tell me about your jug. What I read from your email was that you called it by the right name, which is a Bellarmine jug. You know, that face, that bearded face, is associated with the Bellarmine. And that was, by the way, that was Cardinal Bellarmine that was named for. But you thought this might be American.
We don't know anything about it.
Okay.
It was in my in-law's house, and we inherited it in 2001.
Okay.
And let the kids put candles in it. Until we found out in 2005, when we moved, we had all our household contents appraised, and the appraiser said it was worth $4,000. And that it was, all she called it was a glazed earthenware jug, possibly 1,700.
I agree that it's 1700s. This brings up an interesting point about history in Virginia. I was doing some research on this, and when they've been doing all these excavations at Jamestown, they have found 7,000 fragments that they think came from Bellarmine jugs. And it's about 1720. But it's made in the Rhineland. These were used for shipping. They would ship oil and vinegar, and of course, anything that was watertight that you could put a cork in Williamsburg in those early days was considered rare and dear, so they hung on to them. But you know, there were zillions of them imported into America during the 18th century. And I think this one was made in Germany. And as far as value goes, I looked at some Bellarmine jugs at auction, and they're under $1,000, you know, more like, you know, well, here's the thing about it. If we could prove that that was American, the 4,000 wouldn't be wrong, because it's super early. You remember me talking about stoneware earlier, about, you know, that faceware jug and everything. But in this case, that's European, and there's lots of them. If you go to the Rhineland, I'd say you could probably see as many as you want there. They're not rare, but they're cool. And pottery from that time period, I love it because it's so ovoid. You know, the more graduated an earlier piece of pottery is, you know, to create that ovoid form, that tells you that it's earlier. And then as you go further after 1800, the sides start straightening up. They still have the taper at the top. And then by the time you get to 1900, they're just basically square-shaped, round, molded in a machine where all these were thrown by hand. That's a good early piece of pottery. I probably would not let the kids put candles in it. I think you were wise there. Okay, Suzanne Brown brought us a violin. Tell us about your violin, Suzanne.
It was my father's, and he told me the story, and I have to say, I stopped listening at some point. Because I heard a lot of stories from my dad. Darn. But I've had it in my possession since 2008. And the bow is terrible because the horsehair is all broken up. But he said it was a Stradivarius, but made maybe in the US, in the style of Stradivarius. Yeah, you gotta look inside the holes there.
Antonio Stradivarius. Crementa. Okay. Well, first of all, this is a very nice violin, and it's in good condition. The varnish is nice on it. Nice curly maple on the back. Spruce on the top. And set up and playable, you know, it's probably would be a pretty good violin to play. But in 1900, this is probably late 19th, early 20th century, rather than from the 1700s. And if you pull up a copy of the Sears and Roebuck catalog from 1900, there's a page in there where you can buy a violin with a label by all the master makers, including Antonio Stradivarius. But it doesn't mean that it's not a nice instrument that's very playable. And I know a lot of guys in old time and bluegrass that played these. And, you know, there's no substitute for age in a musical instrument, so it's probably got a pretty nice sound. If you got somebody, you know, if you make sure the sound post is in there, make sure it doesn't have any loose glue joints. And it looks like somebody's been playing it since the 20s or 30s because it has these fast tuners on it. So somebody was playing it. I'll tell you, when we first got married, I got a violin and I ran off my wife and the cats. And I decided I better stick to the guitar because this thing doesn't have frets. Got a lot of bad notes on it, but it's a cool thing. Okay. Miss Krinsman. No. Karen. Where are you, Karen? All right, you're back there in the North 40. Do you have anything you want to say about your Buddha? In the 60s, bought by your grand. Her. You're absolutely right. It is Tibetan. Now, I am going to pronounce this for you, and then I'm going to give you 3 chances to say it fast. This is a Tibetan deity. The name is Ushnish Havayaya. Ushnish Havayaya. And it's the kind of thing that would have been made for the tourist trade, possibly contemporary to the time that they were there. And those little things inside of there are prayers. And here's the interesting part. In the really old ones that are hundreds of years old, they actually put prayers and body parts inside of them. So thank God when the workmen knocked it over, you know, somebody's leg bone didn't roll out or something. Great conversation piece. And I corresponded with a friend in New York that helps me with this, and she said that, you know, the retail value of something like this would probably be, you know, a few $100, $300 to $400, somewhere in that neighborhood. But I love the fact that they put the body parts in the old ones. All righty. Our next one, we're not going to get here in person. And Who has this? Are you here? Oh, okay. I remember you wrote me and said that it had wooden works, and your family originally was from Germany, you said? Is that right? Okay. Well, you made some very accurate presumptions in your email because you said that you thought that it has wooden works, which means it'll work 24 hours. And, most clock collectors don't want wooden works to run them because they work you to death, really, literally, because you got to wind them up every 24 hours. But I think you're absolutely right that the face and the works are probably imported. But if you look at the top of the crest up there, you see those nice hand-cut dovetails? And that's made of walnut. And it's probably from around 1800. And probably, was your family, you said they were in Pennsylvania? To where? Where's that? There you go. Well, I was going to say, it looks like a valley clock to me. And I'm not sure who did it or what the hand is, but it's very typical that you see a country cabinet maker doing their interpretation of a clock like this. And it looks like it's made out of walnut. Is that right? Okay, well, that wouldn't be unusual. And just a very simple clock, probably around 1800. And value in today's world for something like that, a dealer might try to get, $5,000 or $6,000 for it. It's probably less than that. One of the things that we're having a lot of challenges with now is grandfather clocks because not everybody wants them. And again, you talk about real estate, there's wall space, there's floor space. And do you really want to dust that? But it's a cool thing and very representative of what I would have seen in, western Pennsylvania going down into the valley. And you see stuff like that in Tennessee and Kentucky and North Carolina. That's a nice clock. And it's probably under 8 feet, isn't it? So that's a big thing too, because the ones with the longer drops could be 9 feet tall. Eliminates a lot of houses. All right, somebody brought us a watercolor here. Ms. Krentzman? Here. Elizabeth. So what do you want to tell us about that, Elizabeth?
This was a gift of a former client of my father's, who's a lawyer. He had, upon his death, his wife gave, actually, there were 2 paintings and a very special keynote.
I'm glad you brought it so I could see it in person because it's really nicely done. Very attractive. What I call a Victorian genre painting, innocence of childhood, innocence of the female sex in general. That there was a lot of very sentimental paintings like that. Unfortunately, I cannot find anything of somebody named E.M. Prince. But it's better than average in the way that it's executed, and it's really nice subject matter. It's in the original frame. And, if I saw something like that in an antique shop, they might ask $1,000 for it, but it'd probably be an easier sell at $600 to $800. The price of all this kind of stuff is really driven by the artist and the subject matter. And a lot of these sometimes are based on, they're print-based. There's another image out there that they may have copied it from rather than painting it from life. What would be great is if it was one of your family members or, you know. But when you get it home, we won't be there, so you can make up any story you want to. Yeah, that's my Aunt Suki. She was first one on the coal trains coming off the. Well, that's not illustrious, though. You need to make up a better story than that. Okay, somebody brought us a nice silver pitcher. Margaret, that is sensational. I love that. So what did you want to tell me about it?
Well, I know it was made by Kirk in Baltimore, and it belonged to my great-grandfather, who was Richard Thomas Walker Duke, who was the first full-time judge in Charlottesville. And the Duke crest was engraved by Tiffany in 1888 in New York. And I know my mother loved to use it for her dinner parties.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. She poured shots out of it. Shots of water and iced tea, probably. Well, you know, it's so funny. We just finished a huge appraisal in Charlottesville that had probably 300 or 400 pieces of Kirk Steve Reposé rose pattern. So needless to say, I'm pretty fresh on that. And it's so interesting looking at things like this now, especially given what the silver market has done. You know, we were over 100 until the proposed Federal Reserve chairman was named, who would be maybe fiscally more conservative than everybody thought. So a lot of people sold, you know, silver went down from like $105 to $70 from Friday to Monday, but now it's back up some. But here's the thing about stuff like this, and this is just what I've learned from doing this. You can put a per ounce price on it, but you have to add for the workmanship. And that says 11.0, Kirk, 11 point, that's probably 11 ounces Troy. And people call that coin silver, but it's probably sterling. You know, sterling is 925 out of 1,000. Coin silver is 800 out of 1,000. But, you know, the question for silver now becomes, is it worth more dead than alive? And in your case, definitely worth more alive. You know, as much as double or more of melt value right now, and that'll change depending on what happens to the melt value. But I would say if it's 11 ounces, it's probably going to be at least probably retail with that history. Somebody probably try to get at least 5,000 for it, you know, which is a lot more than what its melt value is. Did your mom get that cleaned professionally? Is that how it got that shine on it?
No, we just keep it in the bag.
My goodness, y'all, I tell you, I say you must have been busy before you got here, because that thing is so clean and nice. Well, that's a beautiful thing, and thank you for bringing it. And our last thing is not that. That. Sorry, let me go back to that so you can see how pretty that is. I forgot to bring it up. Now, that's what you call the reposé work. It's done from the inside, you know, chased by hand. And that's about as nice as you're going to get on something like that. And I picked these frontures just so we could talk a little bit about what a fronture is and talk about things from Virginia. Who belongs to these? Tell us about them.
Well, I really think they're from Upper New York State, which is where my maternal grandparents
Yeah, these are Pennsylvania. And Lancaster County, Lancaster Township. Yeah, that one's Pennsylvania too. 1841 and 1840. So the reason these are called Fraktuurs is because German for fractured writing. Okay? And people of, Germanic Swiss descent traditionally use these for family announcements, births, weddings. And the best ones were made by hand, completely by hand, a lot from Pennsylvania, some from the Valley, but by the 1840s, a company in Pennsylvania was printing these. And so what makes those interesting is who the family is, and also they colored them by hand. So some of them are more interesting than others, but they have birds and angels and, have a lot of nice symbolic imagery in them, and they're very decorative. But a printed Fraktur like that, for the pair, at most probably would be $1,500 for the two. There's so many more printed ones than there are ones completely done by hand, but irreplaceable for you guys because of your family. And I would say too that they probably have something with acidity behind them right now, the way they're framed. And if you want to take care of them for future generations, you may want to get it away from the glass and do something acid-free on the back. But that's getting into another whole set of things, like is it glued down, or, have y'all ever seen old prints and things in frames where they have a piece of wood on the back? And if there's a knot on there with the hard, on the back of it, you can actually see where the acidity from that knot is higher, and it leaves an impression or a ghosting thing. It's called foxing on the paper itself. So, and you have things like that, you need to make sure they're not in an acidic setting. Any questions? Have I just completely overloaded you? You want me? Well, come up here. They're in German. I can see Pennsylvania, but I can probably Google image the names for you. You need to look in your family history and see who was in Pennsylvania in the 1840s. If you have genealogy from the 1840s, you'll find those names in there. Yeah, well, and the other thing is, if you have anybody in your family that knows how to do computer stuff really well, there's all kinds of websites that have genealogical information. You can look that up. I could tell you what I think it says, but it might not mean anything. Oh, the names. Why? Before we go in the other room, if you want to come up here, we can look at them.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.